this idea that as long as we have every participant in every transaction prove their identity, and we can track and control every transaction through this totalitarian surveillance system, we will end crime. And in order to believe in that false idea of safety through totalitarian control, we condemn billions of people to poverty.
We're sitting at a historical crossroads where the future of money is going to be digital. We're seeing a concerted effort around the world to ban cash, to reduce the availability, the value, and the liquidity of cash everywhere in the world. We saw India demonetize the top 2 value notes they have. Spain is passing a law to make it illegal to make any transaction more than 1,000 euros in cash. Probably the 500 euro, 100 euro notes are going to disappear eventually. You're seeing this process of demonetization, of removing cash from the economy in order to funnel it all into banking systems that are under constant control and surveillance. This is a very dangerous future.
And that's usually because they want the taxation or they want the legislation. Either they see that money used by corrupt parties or they just use that as an excuse to control it.
The biggest criminals in the world have banking licenses of their own. They don't need to money launder. They own HSBC and that money launders for them. You know, the biggest money launderers in the world are the banks, obviously, because that's where the money is. The easiest way to money launder is if you have a banking license. So of course, the biggest money launderers have banking licenses. These are excuses. What they want to do, of course, is, they say, taxation and corruption, but in fact, this actually increases corruption. So removing cash from an economy and putting everybody under surveillance doesn't mean that criminals can't use money anymore. Of course they can. They will continue to do that. They will always have means of doing it. It just means that everybody else is under surveillance. So you end up surveilling the innocent. What does that give you? That gives you political control. We've never had in the history of humanity the ability to monitor everybody's economic activity all the time. And to give that power to governments without question is extremely dangerous. It won't reduce crime, but it will turn governments into criminals. It won't reduce corruption, but it will increase corruption at banks. And it will put people at the mercy of a system in which, at a flick of a binary switch, you can become a non-person. Went to the wrong website, attended the wrong protests, associated with the wrong political party, expressed support for the wrong idea, off. You no longer exist. You can't buy food, you can't buy anything, you can't earn anything, and all of your money disappeared.
Because we don't give you a bank account, and since you can't use cash for anything, then you basically are a non-citizen.
You are a non-person. And what this will end up doing is it will end up putting the burden, again, on the most powerless in our society, right? The poor, those who don't have ID, undocumented immigrants, victims of human trafficking, refugees. These people are going to be suffering the burden to create this bourgeois illusion of safety and give massive powers to governments that certainly haven't earned the trust to have these kinds of powers. Criminals will have privacy. The question is whether the rest of us will. And so that is the thing. Criminals will use these systems. Criminals will bypass the rules. Criminals will bribe and corrupt officials, and they will bypass the rules. They will deal in gold or Rolexes or cars. In fact, at some point in the height of the crack epidemic, they tried to ban cash in Baltimore in the United States, and criminals switched to using Tide detergent as cash. Fungible, transportable, brand unforgeable, and useful.
Just crates of Tide, move it around different
right?
warehouses.
There will always be criminal activity. That's part of society. Changing the way money works only ends up punishing the innocent. And so criminals will always have privacy. Brian, do you want to also have privacy? Or do you want only criminals to have privacy and only governments to have privacy?
The real drug financing doesn't happen in cash. It happens in millions of barrels of oil and billions of pallets of dollars transmitted through wire transfers by the banks who get caught again and again and again and again. And they pay a fine that is a fraction, not only of the criminal behavior that they profited from, but of the tens of thousands of deaths they've directly contributed to. And not a single person goes to jail. And at the same time, some people have the audacity to say that we need to end cash in order to stop crime. We have to understand, surveillance never stopped crime. Surveillance is the license given to the people who are on the top of that to control our lives. They will commit crimes. They will commit the worst of crimes, what I call mega crimes. Mega is the prefix we use for millions. A mega crime is one where, for example, you foreclose on 1 million homeowners and don't go to jail. That's a mega crime. We're doing surveillance and analytics to catch a petty drug dealer who's selling pot for Bitcoin. Who's doing surveillance and analytics on Lockheed Martin? Who's doing surveillance and analytics on the money laundering banks? Nobody. Do you know why? None of them ever go to jail. The regulators are completely captured, and the very system of controlling finance from above by having levers of power over the lives of millions of people, billions of people, of having the audacity to cut off entire countries and say, well, they're under sanctions. They're not privileged enough, they're not people enough to gain financial services. Guess who that attracts? If you build levers of power like that, the very worst sociopaths in our society are attracted like flies to shit to grab hold of those levers of power and destroy all of your freedoms as quickly as they can. We are building societies in which one bad election is the last election. And if you don't believe me, look at what's happened in Turkey, what's happened in Russia, what's happened in Venezuela, what happens every day to billions of people around the world. Let me end on a positive note, because you're probably a bit freaked out by all of this. You should be. This is serious stuff. Open, borderless, public, transparent, neutral, censorship-resistant, strictly private cryptocurrencies exist. They will not be regulated. They cannot be regulated, not by committees, because they're regulated by mathematics. They're regulated by algorithms. They provide certainty of transaction. They provide programmable customer protection. They provide reputation management. They provide access without identity. They give billions of people, eventually, not just a bank account in their pocket, but a bank in their pocket. They democratize the function of banking and turn it into an app that everyone can access without vetting, because they've already pre-vetted. They have agreed to download the software that follows the rules of consensus, and that is the only vetting required in these systems. But we shouldn't allow that. We did. But we can't have people make anonymous transactions. They will. But we must regulate this. You can't, and you won't, because 6 billion people need this. Should we regulate crypto? How much should we regulate crypto? Who should regulate crypto? Fuck that. Crypto is about providing universal basic finance to whoever needs it, everywhere in the world, whether we like it or not. And what will people do with universal basic finance? What they've done for millennia with access to cash. They will build a future for their children.
You got to start thinking about these things and think how these people and the system itself, what the incentives are to think of potential probabilities so you can make sure that you're not one of those victims. You can either be prepared or be a victim. It's your choice. If they start to ban cash, if you look at the Banking for All Act, that's basically where we have accounts with the Federal Reserve. If we, the people, all have accounts with the Fed, then there's really no need for the banking system. There is no banking system. There is only one central bank. That's it. And so if the Fed has a balance sheet where basically they can take an infinite haircut. What that means, if the Fed loans you money and you don't pay it back, it doesn't matter. They don't have a profit and loss. So they can start to distribute money, not to whomever they want, but how they want. So instead of giving you a mortgage based on your credit score or your ability to repay the loan, they can do it based on your social score.
Did you wear your mask today? Do you have a
Exactly.
vaccine shot?
Exactly.
Did you cross the street?
That's right.
Did you bow?
There is some disturbing news from China.
China's growing network of surveillance cameras makes all of this possible. China's version factors in everything from jaywalking to smoking on trains to buying too many video games.
Some people with low scores already being punished, rather, if they want to travel. Nearly 11 million Chinese people can no longer fly, and 4 million are barred from trains.
There's massive money printing because the U.S. government is in serious financial trouble.
Market participants expecting trillions more in stimulus from both the central bank and Congress.
At the same time, governments have enacted record amounts of fiscal stimulus to boost economies stalled by the pandemic.
When the debt to GDP ratio hits 90%, it's aloha. You've gone too far. November 2020, it's 130% debt to GDP. And they expect it to go to 250% debt to GDP. What that means is the U.S. government has to print more fake money.
When governments or central banks print money, it doesn't go to everyone in the population equally. It goes to the insiders, the political insiders.
Amen.
So who would be the political insiders today?
Clintons. The Clintons, it would be the individuals at the World Economic Forum. So if you watch any of their videos, you know, they've got this whole big push for a great reset,
Yes.
where they're calling COVID a quote-unquote opportunity. Those are their words, not mine.
Now is the historical moment, the time to shape the system. We need a great reset.
The great opportunity for reset.
These are the insiders that are buddy-buddy with the people, the central bankers, who are printing the money. They're closest to it. So they get it, and it hasn't got out into the economy to create inflation in either consumer prices or assets. So their purchasing power, they get the maximum benefit from this money printing, where by the time it gets down to the average Joe, if it ever does, prices have gone up so much that their purchasing power is less than it was before they printed the money in the first place. So in my opinion, and I'm not saying that the quote-unquote insiders that we talked about, that group of people, are actually doing this, but if you think about their incentive structure, they would be incentivized for the economy to do poorly and for the economy to actually collapse. They would be incentivized to promote things such as negative interest rates. Because what that does is that destroys the banking system or the economy. The more the economy is destroyed, the more money printing the central banks will do, therefore the richer the insiders get.
Which explains why the stock market keeps going up, up, even though people have lost jobs, businesses have shut down, the economy is in the toilet, but the stock market still does great.
Yeah, you know, Kim, I had a great chart the other day in one of my videos where I showed the Buffett indicator. And if you guys don't know, that's the market cap of the stock market compared to GDP, right? And the only time that GDP has ticked down was back in 2008, the GFC in this chart I had. And it went down just slightly, but of course the stock market went down by 50%. Now, it's the only time that I've ever seen in history where GDP has collapsed, but the stock market has skyrocketed.
Right.
It's gone the complete opposite direction. So there is no relationship whatsoever between the stock market and the real economy right now.
Quick question, why did Buffett sell his bank shares?
And if he knows the global elites are trying to destroy the banking system by pushing negative interest rates, obviously Buffett wants nothing to do with that.
Removing cash from an economy and putting everybody under surveillance doesn't mean the criminals can't use money anymore. Of course they can. They will continue to do that. They will always have means of doing it. It just means that everybody else is under surveillance. So you end up surveilling the innocent. What does that give you? That gives you political control. This is a very dangerous road we're going down.
Let's think about this. We all have a bank account, we'll just say B of A, Wells Fargo, whatever, and you get your bank statements every single month, and then you reconcile that with QuickBooks or whatever. So now if we had a bank account with the Fed, then the Federal Reserve or the government would see every single one of your transactions. especially if there was no cash whatsoever, right? So then every transaction had to go through the Fed or the government. So the amount of power that this would give them is basically unlimited.
That's really totalitarian communism and all that.
I think it's even worse.
What you have here is you have grunge, you have the government, you have banks, you have Wall Street, then you have education, media, military, and big pharma. They control the economy, big corporation. But underneath this whole thing is a global plumbing system. Gold, silver, Bitcoin are not part of this system.
Gold and silver being God's money, but Bitcoin being the people's money.
Yes.
And so one of the biggest arguments I hear about Bitcoin is, won't the government just ban it? Right?
Yeah.
So let's think about this, right? Bitcoin, and they say the government will never adopt it. No, the government won't. It's the people's money. But to that point, right? So Bitcoin, or PayPal announced they're going to support Bitcoin. And it's kind of a trap. You can't really get it off the system. You can't really use it. But it exposes about 350 million people to Bitcoin. So they'll start to use it and go, wait a minute, I can't get off the system. I'll move over here. Within the next year, I would imagine we'll have over 1 billion people using Bitcoin. So to everybody's point that says, won't the government ban it? When there's 1 billion people using Bitcoin, the governments aren't going to have much of a choice.
I think that's where gold and Bitcoin fit into the equation. I just look at them as two completely separate asset classes with two different purposes, right? I think that gold is there as an insurance policy just to protect your purchasing power. So I always say you buy gold not to get rich, but to stay rich. And then Bitcoin is more of a speculation, or you've got some asymmetry there, probably a lot more upside than you have downside. Those are unique assets in that they don't have any counterparty risk. And see, that's very important when you're in the everything bubble. The main thing though is we've got to figure out a way to limit the ability for the central planners to create more currency. That's what it's about. And if you look at the gold guys, the Bitcoin guys, we're all on the same team here.
Right.
And that's limiting the central planners from creating all of those currency units that trickle down and play into the Cantillon
How does
effect.
that happen? How does that happen?
Well, as an example, with Bitcoin, there's only 21 million of them. So if we went onto, let's say, a Bitcoin standard, I'm not saying this is what we're doing,
Right.
I'm just, let's go through a thought experiment. Well, that would prevent the Jerome Powell from coming in and taking his balance sheet from 4 trillion to 7 trillion. That would prevent, and not only that, but see, a lot of people on the left say, oh, well, yeah, that's terrible because we can't do these social programs. But what they forget is it would also make it harder for the governments to go to war because they can't print the money. The only way they could go to war is if they actually tax the citizens first. And so if we're not on board with them going to war, we're like, no, I'm not paying for that.
The reason I like gold, silver, and Bitcoin, it's outside the system. It's out of reach of the US government and the US Treasury and things like this. So I love this stuff. I just simply do not trust my government. If you do, save money, save dollars, and have a good life.